Welcome to you all. Bienvenue à tous. And here it is morning, 10 o'clock. So my name is Vinish Saxena, and I'm your host. This is our fourth public meeting for the Consciousness Center. And please note that this event is being recorded. So let me tell you something how this project started. I have been interested in the spirituality as well as humanity for a long time. I have a foundation which has two objectives. First objective is to help the needy, the people who are in financial difficulty. And the other objective is to explore unanswered spiritual questions. Is soul there? Is there life after life? Is God there? I have been teaching yoga for a long time. Also, I'm a Reiki Grandmaster. By profession, I'm an engineer. So the logic plays is important part in my thinking. When I look at different religions and spiritual practices, whether it is prayer or it is meditation, it is yoga, chanting, Tai Chi, or even walking in the nature, I ask myself a question: what is going on here? What are the people trying to do? On the other hand, there are many situations and events which we cannot explain. Just imagine, look at the universe and think, where does the universe end? Just close your eyes for a minute and just think about that question. Where does this universe end? We have no idea, right? There are many other things, like some people have psychic abilities, like a telepathy, astral traveling, mediumship, clairvoyance, and most of the people don't. Some people go through the near-death experiences, and majority of them, they don't. Some people are very rich, and some people are on the street, nothing to eat. So when I look at all these situations, I wonder and contemplate what is going on here. And the more I ponder and contemplate, it seems that there is a greater reality. There is a super or universal consciousness. And there is a whole truth, and we are being shown only a small portion of the truth. It is like you go to the movie and you see only few scenes. So you will keep on wondering while the whole movie is about. This is what I find about the universe. We don't know, we have no idea of totality. So looking at all these things, it seems the most important objective is to get in, to increase or develop the consciousness. Because as we develop the consciousness, we can be in the state of bliss, we can heal ourselves, we can get ideas to some of our questions, we can develop intuition. So this is why I started this project, Center for Development of Consciousness. And the objective of this center is assisting people of all faiths, beliefs, backgrounds, and from the entire spectrum of diversity to improve understanding of the universe and our own reality, increase awareness of internal and external, and develop raised consciousness. And these links, the first link is to my foundation, which helps the needy. Second link is to explore spiritual questions. And the third link is yoga. And the fourth link is for the Center for Consciousness Development. The yoga is on set. Before it used to be in the gym. Now it is in the Zoom. If somebody wants to join, it is each Saturday from 8:30 to 10. And it is all free. So let us now introduce our speaker, Edward Fanaberia. Mr. Fanaberia undertook studies in India with masters like Muktanada, the mother in Pondicherry, and Koroli Baba, who was the guru of Ramdas, who's a lot of us are familiar with the teachings of Baba Ramdas, also Sai Baba and others. Today, he will share some of these experiences. Subsequently, he was accepted to train with JG Bennett, one of the foremost teachers of Gurdjieff's work in Europe. And he has been teaching these practices for last 45 years. Today, he will demonstrate tools to increase inner and outer freedom and help us to awaken conscience and learn to live by conscience rather than by rules or external morality or by feelings and impulses. Conscience is really the creator of our individuality. Much of his presentation will include experiencing practical and verifiable tools to give you taste of Gurdjieff's work. And currently he's a director of Gurdjieff, Montreal. We will have a break after 40 minutes and 10 minutes break before and 10 minutes question period before the break and 10 minutes question period and sharing before the end of the day. So now without much delay, I will ask Edward to take over. Edward, unmute yourself.
Done.
Good. So it is all yours. We are ready to hear.
Vinesh,
yes.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the administration and support and the time you took to meet with me. Hello, everyone. Some of you already are familiar with me and with some of the Gurdjieff work. And some of you, this is the first time. I know many of you are not showing your video of yourself. And so I wasn't able to say hello to you when you're present. You'll notice that both Vinesh and I are talking from a small screen. This is my preference because it's sort of like we're a group and we're meeting together, and the opportunity to see each other, even though some of you are on a separate screen, you can move back and forth and just be aware that we're together, at least in this particular presentation. So before I actually start talking about some of my experiences, I want to give you a taste of an aspect of presence, something that you can verify. Most of you are familiar with the concept of left foot. So I'm going to ask all of you at this moment, kindly put your attention into your left foot. What that simply means is you're becoming aware of any kind of sensation or energy in your left foot. You're getting an idea of how practical I intend to be in this talk. So you're picking up some quality of sensation. Perhaps you can feel your toes. Perhaps you can feel the pressure of the floor. Perhaps your shoe, the sock. And as you put your attention in your left foot and you're aware of various elements of sensation, please observe that as you're doing that, the inner talking has reduced or temporarily disappeared. And so during my talk, the default of your attention, please, I will suggest again and again, keep your attention in your left foot. There's nothing special about the left foot, except that in this particular case, it allows you to use your control, your choice, to use your effort to do something intentionally that you can verify. And so this is a kind of divided attention, because you'll notice that as you're keeping your attention in your left foot, you're also able to hear me and perhaps be slightly less distracted by other things that your mind attends to automatically. And I'll explain a little further. What you are currently doing is you are using intentional attention. And it's nearly like a homeopathic experience in the body. You're connecting your mental energy with the physical sensation energy. And in the teaching that I'm currently being involved with for 45 years also, it's a way of verifying a certain aspect of your presence. Instead of thinking about it, you experience it. And many things can be done. And you may find that by keeping some of your attention in your left foot, and understand it could be your breath, it could be your left ear, but it's something that you've selected intentionally. And as a result, you may find that you're able to listen more clearly, that you're able to retain more. And most of all, it may allow you to have a choice of how you wish to be. This kind of training is not just for the meditation room. It's also for the other 99% of the day that you're experiencing. So, one day, I guess it was in the early 70s, perhaps in 1972, I woke up and I became aware that I had made a decision to go to India. And this caused me some distress because I didn't remember thinking about it, at least not consciously. And within 6 months, I had changed my life and traveled to India. And there were many unusual experiences that happened. Yes, it's true that I was doing some transcendental meditation at the time. And yes, I was doing yoga fairly often during the week. But nothing really had prepared me for that kind of decision. I mentioned to you a number of teachers that I had met while I was in India and lived with, at least on their ashrams. And this is what Vinesh has asked me mostly to talk about. So from the number of teachers that Vinesh mentioned, if some of you can say, yes, Sai Baba, or yes, one of the other gurus or teachers, I will perhaps choose to talk also about that particular teacher. And I will share what my personal experiences were, not their philosophy. So I'll be able to bring it down to a very practical thing. So if one of you has something in particular, just raise your hand, and I'll say your name, and that's the kind of teacher that I'll talk about. However, while you're thinking about that, I want to talk about the synchronicity. When I made my decision, I was in my early 30s in those days, and I was concerned with the financial aspect of paying for all the transportation, etc. And I thought, wow, perhaps the best way to do it is to find an inexpensive flight to Paris. And in Paris, I was told that one could find other flights that are very less expensive. And so one day I was traveling to New York State. I'd made a decision to visit an American ashram, so I'd have a taste, an idea of what it was about. My companion and me were approaching the Champlain Bridge in Montreal. And for those of you away, Montreal is an island, and so it was crossing the bridge. And just before the bridge in those days, there was a young man hitchhiking. Still have your left foot going? And for some reason, I stopped. He got into the back seat of the car. And as I was crossing the Champlain Bridge, for some reason, I asked him, by the way, do you know anyone that has an inexpensive airplane ticket to Paris? And he said, yes, I do. I was in Paris myself with my girlfriend and came back 3 weeks ago. And it was less expensive for me to purchase a return ticket than to buy a single ticket. And so I have the return ticket available. And you could have both the tickets for $150. The synchronicity was so extreme that we made arrangements to contact each other in a few days. And when I looked up at the sky, I thought I saw this in the clouds. That's how excited I was with that kind of synchronicity. And so that was the beginning of my adventure. And there were a variety of other things that happened that were just as astounding. It took me a while to realize that the state that I was in, the willingness and the receptivity to open to this kind of search, this kind of adventure, seemed to have attracted these kinds of experiences. And what I'm suggesting to all of you is that when you're covered by your habits, when you're covered by your attitudes, the generosity and the experience of vulnerability that enables you to be freshly open covers a large part of the experiences of life. And these attitudes, these habits, are somewhat like a, what do we call those things that a horse wears that covers its eyes? And so the horse only looks where you want it to see. What is it called?
Blinders.
Blinkers.
Blinkers, blinders.
Blinders, yeah.
Yes. And that was my first taste. Well, the first taste that I was consciously aware of was that in that excitement, in that openness, in that vulnerability, if one says, it allowed other experiences to be more perceptive to me. And that realization was the start of my adventure, which lasted nearly a year in India. And even though I was fairly ignorant spiritually, that's for sure, and I suspect I still am, I think the teachers that I met, when they when they were aware of that kind of vulnerability, enabled them to respond to me, not because I had lots of potential and I was an extremely important, good person. I was this naive individual that was going to India looking for super consciousness. And I suspect that's some of the reason why the various teachers responded to me the way they did. So I'll go in random order, and I'll share with you an example of how naive or innocent or vulnerable I was. On the list of teachers that I had decided to visit with others, the help of others that, especially my yoga teacher at the time, somewhat into my experience in India, I chose to go to southern India in Kerala. Kerala is one of the southern states in India. And there was a teacher by the name of Sri Rama. And he had passed away a few years before, and a lady, companion who had studied with him, had become the guru in residence, if one can say. Her name is, or was, Mother Krishnabai. And she was regarded as a saint in that area of Kerala. And I spent several weeks there. And one of the instructions that I was given was to have my lunch in a house on the ashram that was occupied by several South African young gentlemen who were excellent cooks. And so each day for lunch, which was an unusual experience in the sense of having a gourmet lunch in India, I sat down and had this grand meal. However, in those days, I experienced huge gas and abdomen distension. I didn't know that I had a problem with my vesicle biliaire, gallbladder. And so I would go sit immediately after eating in audience with Mother Krishnabai. And most often at that time of the day, I was the only one. And Mother Krishnabai sat on this double bed in one corner of the room. And in the opposite corner was a large stuffed chair with a large photograph of her guru, Sri Rama. And whenever she looked, or so I thought at that time, at the picture, I would get a jolt of energy that went, and I thought that as she looked at the picture, some of the reflection, the way I was sitting, would bounce off onto me. That's the way I thought. And so whatever she was doing, sitting in her room, keeping your left foot going, whatever she was doing, every time she glanced at the picture, I would go, "Eh." And after about 20 or 25 minutes, I checked my body and I realized that the discomfort from eating had disappeared. So I just got up, bowed, and walked out. And so I discovered that by choosing that routine, I would have less physical discomfort and I'd be able to eat this wonderful food at lunch. That's partly the way my brain worked in those days. One day, towards the end of my visit, as I was sitting innocently, Mother Krishnabai, instead of looking at the picture, turned her direction a tiny bit, looked at me, and I felt this energy go into my chest. And the first thought I had was, she's pushing me out of the room. I don't remember panicking, but I just remember this huge energy coming into my chest. And that was my association. I also noticed that the discomfort in my body from the lunch had disappeared. And so, not knowing anything else, I stood up, bowed, and left. Yes, I was feeling elated, but I didn't associate it with any high state. The next day, Mother Krishnabai asked through her interpreter if I would lead a procession, for which I was very embarrassed to be the first one, because there were perhaps 20 or 30 people in the procession that went around the samadhi, the place of reverence for Sri Rama. A day or two later, I had decided to leave to visit other teachers. And as I was walking away, the door to Mother Krishnabai's room opened and she beckoned to me to come back. So I did, and she was holding a plate. I think it was her lunch. And she took off a morsel from the plate and popped it into my mouth, which is an aspect of Indian tradition. Again, in my ignorance, I bowed and walked away. And when I came to the highway, I hitchhiked, a truck stopped, and I got in. And it was only about 45 minutes later that I realized that I was so stoned, I was traveling south instead of going north where I intended. And so various experiences of that nature occurred with many of the teachers that I mentioned to you. Yes, I had some idea that, oh, I'll become conscious and something along that line. However, I had no idea what it meant. That's why I'm asking you to keep some of your attention in your left foot. So there's a possibility of a slightly different state. I met a teacher by the name of Neem Koroli Baba. At that time, he was in the Himalayas, or Himalayas as we say, and in a valley. And in the tradition of the ashram, for the first 3 days, anyone who comes and asks to stay is welcomed. They put me in a small cabin just outside the ashram, perhaps a 10-minute walk. And one day when I was, and this was in the dry spell, in the dry period in India, in that part of India. And as I was walking to the entrance of the ashram, I noticed smoke coming from high up in the mountains. And I also noticed a small black cloud that was traveling at an unusual speed. It was noticeable to me at that time. And by the time it got to near the area where the smoke was coming, it started to rain. And this was in a period of time when rain wasn't happening. And I felt some drops even on myself. I was astonished. And as I rushed into the ashram, I mentioned it to several of the Westerners that were there, and they didn't seem to be impressed. They just said, yes, Neem Koroli does things like that. That's how he protects us. Neem Koroli Baba, the guru of Ramdas, was quite aged at that time. And he slept in a small one-room cabin. And there was a porch without banisters, without a fence around it. And there was a flat wooden kind of bed out front with a tiny mattress on it. And he would come out in the morning wearing a tartan cover. And that particular morning, somehow or another, I happened to be on that porch when he came out, and he sat down on the bed just in front of me. And when the other Westerners and other Indian gentlemen and women noticed that he'd come out of his room, they rushed forward to be in his presence. And I experienced a rush of energy and a state of lovingness to such an extent that I couldn't remember feeling before. He didn't speak English. And so if he said anything, it was translated by some of his assistants. However, in my naivete, feeling that love, I raised my hands and started massaging his left leg between the knee and the ankle. I didn't know you're not supposed to touch the guru. And I noticed that there was no hair on his leg. And in that state of lovingness for perhaps about 2 minutes, that's what I did. Excuse me. And I became aware that there were perhaps 20 other people behind me who were aching to be close to him. So I stood up and went to the back of the porch so that people behind me could have a chance to have the experience that I had. Excuse me. Neem Koroli Baba, when he stood up, was not very strong in standing. And so he would, as if he was a bit dizzy, his body might fall over to one side or another. So when we walked with him, when he came off the porch, the few young men and women that I was with would surround him in a tight circle so that whichever way he fell, he would hit our bodies and he would be able to get back his balance. I mean, this is how strange it was. And he would insist that we sing some Indian chants, and he'd get a big smile on his face. And that state of lovingness was just wonderful. So there was no question that we would want to do that if we had the opportunity. Shortly, again in my naivete, even though I was having on one level wonderful experiences, on a personal level, the bed that I was sleeping on in the tiny cabin was covered with some kind of red velvet and had straw inside. And it was full of bugs. And so I found myself spending part of my night scratching and itching. And so the physical dilemma was an issue. And then on the other side was this wonderful feeling of lovingness when I was in the presence of Neem Koroli Baba. Just to give you an idea that it wasn't all bliss. Vinesh, it's 10:47. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Vinesh.
We continue another 5 minutes and then we'll take the break.
All right. So do any of you have a particular teacher that I mentioned that you would like me to talk about? I guess you hold up your hand so that.
Yeah, I'd like to hear something about Sai Baba because I read quite a few books about him. And at the beginning, everything sounded okay, but towards the end, his reputation got tarnished. And I'm just wondering how authentic he is.
Well, all right. Sai Baba was one of the teachers or gurus that I had chosen to see. And I'm trying to remember the name of the city that was in central southern India, central India, a little bit south. I think it begins with B, and it's got a huge amount of IT now. It'll come back to me a little later.
Bangalore?
Yeah. Pardon?
Was it Bangalore?
Yes, it was Bangalore. Thank you. And other spiritual seekers that I had met had suggested a place for me to stay when I was in Bangalore that was inexpensive. And I heard that day that he would be coming in a procession through a large park not far away from where I was staying. In those days, I had a black beard and my hair was long, you know, like a hippie in a sense. And I went to the park and it was crowded. The main way, the main kind of road, or if one said a road, not going through this large park, was already filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals that were sitting on each side of the avenue that he was walking, that he was going to come down. And so I chose a side area that was near the main path, the main alleyway that he would be walking through. And I sat in that kind of expectation that I would see him. And yes, shortly, I heard some chanting, and there was Sai Baba at a distance, not far from the corner where I was, with his huge hairdo. And I was excited at the possibility of like being not far from him. And occasionally he stopped and would say something to people. And when he came to the corner where I was, instead of continuing straight, he turned down the direction towards where I was sitting. He was wearing his traditional robe, which sort of came down to about there, and it was this kind of robe that went close to the floor. And he approached me, and so I'd learned by that time, I held my hands up like this, which I'd noticed other people doing. And he held his hand directly on top of my hand. And what I saw coming from his palm was this kind of powder that dropped from his hand into my waiting palms. And you can imagine how excited, if that's the word, I was. Now his robe, he'd actually pulled up his robe a little bit before. And so his arm was totally nude. And so my experience was this powder just came from his hand and dropped into my waiting arms. I just bowed my head to him. I just couldn't talk at that stage. And he just nodded his head and he walked back to the main road and continued. There was an American or a Western gentleman walking with him. And I subsequently learned that that gentleman walking with him had, about a year or so in the past, perhaps not far from his presence, from Sai Baba's presence, had died of a heart attack. And the doctors had rushed, etc., and pronounced him dead. And Sai Baba came into his presence, and whatever he did, that individual revived. And that was one of the miracles that had attracted a huge amount of people to Sai Baba. Later that day, as I walked back to my small bedroom, I met one or two other Westerners who were followers of Sai Baba. And they told me that my experience of receiving that vibhuti, which was the powder, that was the name of it, was is when one burns incense, the powder that accumulates after the incense is burned is called vibhuti. And it's burnt at the various altars or in some kind of prayer. And so I put it carefully into an envelope. And the others showed me that they, over the years they had been there, or many months, had also received that kind of vibhuti. And one of the individuals that I was talking to showed me some jewelry that had fallen from his hand when he had held it on top of them. Did it give me any understanding of where things were? No. But did I feel extremely elated? Yes. Was I meditating in the morning? Yes, I was doing 10 or 15 minutes of meditation each morning. But most of all, I was trying to digest my experiences and deal with the dilemmas of physical travel, finding enough food to eat, knowing where to sleep. At the same time, I was having these other experiences. In that town of Bangalore was a man called Krishnamurti. He wasn't the Krishnamurti that we know of here who had written all the books. I think his name was JJ Krishnamurti or SJ. And I'll share my experiences with him when we come back from our break. One moment, Vinesh. One thing that I do to break the spell of the seriousness of the talks that I give, or your seriousness, is we do something a little bit silly. In a sense, it comes from Ramana Maharshi. And I'll talk about him too after the break. So what I'm going to ask you to do is, do you know the sound that an owl makes? So could you all take off the mute? And the sound that the owl makes is, and remember, an owl has big eyes. All right? So it goes like this. Open your eyes big and go. See you in 5 minutes. Is that all right, Finesh?
Okay, just a minute. Before we take a break, I would like to just say a few things. That the concept of the synchronicity is very important, and most of the people experience that in their life. Also, all the incidents and experiences which Edward talked about, this is a part of the greater reality. And this is what I have been talking about, that we need to understand that there is a greater reality, there is a universal consciousness, and if we can tap into it, then we can do also similar kind of things or get more idea of the greater reality. For developing consciousness, one of the important things is that we should be in good shape. So before break, I will do some few exercises to awaken us. So we'll do Y. Make a Y with your hands. W. Like a W. Make a L. And make a T. Both hands straight. Y. Let me just click in here. Y, W, L, L like this, and T.
I can't see your L.
Let me just, what happened to the Zoom? Speaker view. Okay. Y, W, L, and T. Good.
So you bend your elbows in L?
In L, you elbows, yeah.
2 L's.
2 L's, yeah. Y, both hands up. Both hands up. W, just, and L, 2 L's.
Wells.
Yeah, like this, and T. Both
As
hands.
Mary Corona is doing?
Good. We'll do, just take the hands further. This is 2 fingers because we work on the computers. It is a good exercise. You can put your thumb inside, same thing. We can put fingers on the shoulder and do exercise for shoulders.
Other way.
Good. We'll take fingers like this and give a big rotation. You can change the direction. And we can also massage our head. Good. So we'll like to thank But before we break, are there any questions? Anybody has any question? Okay, so we'll take 5 minutes break and then we will come back.
So when you take the break,
Yeah.
if you happen to be going to the bathroom, if you remember your left foot, when you in the bathroom, touch your face with cold water. And I'll ask you about that when you get back. In other words, rinse your face with cold water. And we'll talk about that when you return. Woo! 5 minutes. Look at the time. Look at the time. 5 minutes.
11:10.
Thank you.
What can we do? What can we do? So now is going okay? Huh? Going okay?
Hi, Andre Florent. William Waller. What time is it for you?
Et 11h10, mais j'en ai perdu beaucoup parce que ma connexion tantôt, quand vous avez parlé, là, j'en ai perdu.
Okay. Merci, Andre. William Waller,
It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
in the afternoon.
It's just getting dark now, and we've got our first snowfall of the year.
Oh, we too in Montreal. Excuse me. David?
Yes, Edward.
I'm busy for about an hour.
I know, but I need to tell you, I cannot speak on the audio. It's failing, and I don't know who can help me with that. I tried to call.
Okay, I have to go, David. I'm
Just to
online.
let you know, that's why I'm not talking.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Okay, so our meeting is on, and I will request Edward to talk about some practical tools to increase our inner and outer freedom, help us to awaken conscience and get connected with the universal consciousness. Good, Edward, all you.
All right. Well, I don't generally dwell on universal consciousness. I dwell on something, even if I have the experience, it's hard for me to relate it in words, and it's only occasionally. However, just to bring it down to practicality. Oh, many people are not here yet. Let me see. All right.
Please just take out, put on your video so we know you are here.
What Vinesh is asking is, if you can, please put your video on. Hi, Jocelyn Sanon.
Justin Sanyo is our expert in computers.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Edward.
All right. So my question to you is, if you had the opportunity to rinse your face with cold water, what did you experience? What did you notice? Mary Karana.
Yes, my entire body got a shock. I'm not used to rinsing my face with cold water, so it was a bodily shock, I would say, from head to toe.
Very good. And when you experienced the shock, how did you feel? Were you surprised? Were you said shocked?
Yeah.
Did you have what do you call those little bumps on your skin?
Goosebumps? No,
Yes.
no. It was more inside my skin. It was more my internal, I don't know, just inside me was just all woken up suddenly.
Exactly.
As if I was asleep inside, and suddenly I got shaken awake.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
Perhaps others of you noticed something that happened. Now, the reason I had asked you to rinse your face with cold water, if you were able to, was yes, it was a shock. And the shock that you had, for a moment, you're intensely aware of the sensation. And the regular thinking, the regular casualness in that moment disappeared. And it may have left some of you with a moment of presence. That in that moment, you broke the routine, the casual routine of how you regularly are. What I'm suggesting is that we're so surrounded by our regular routine that that regular routine causes a kind of automatic state where we're automatically listening and talking to ourselves. We're automatically doing our exercises. We're automatically eating our food, talking on the phone. And it's a automatic state that is present, and you can determine what percentage of your lives you're in that automatic state. And what I'm suggesting to you is by doing something slightly out of your automatic state by intention, there's a possibility of a quality of presence that is slightly different. So when I'm suggesting to you, put your attention in your left foot, this is going out of your routine. You are changing a small, tiny habit. And by working, like, here's an example. Yes, I've asked you to keep your attention in your left foot. Now I'm asking you that if you choose to move, to scratch your face, or to change your position, or to move your feet, do it at half the speed that you would normally do it. So here I am. And instead of doing, I'm using my routine, and I'm altering it slightly. And by doing it at half the speed, it's also changing my routine. And changing the routine is a moment, gives a possibility moment of being more awake. Yes, it does, as Linda Perot has said, it is somewhat like being more present in the moment. It's our routines that keep us asleep. It's not that the routines are bad, they're very useful, but they keep us asleep. So here's an example that I use that's fun. Could you all cross your hands the way I have suggested? Just anyway, you see, just regular. Does it feel comfortable?
Yes.
I'll assume it's a yes.
Yes.
Now, what I'm suggesting is do the opposite now. If you notice your left thumb is on top, do the same thing with your other thumb on top. Is there anything morally wrong with what you've just done?
No.
How does it feel?
Less comfortable.
Exactly. Now hold that. You all notice that it's slightly less comfortable. However, to sustain that slightly less comfortable moment requires will, requires intention. And even if you do it for another 30 seconds, there's a quality of presence that's involved because you're using intention to sustain that. Now, go back to the regular way you do it. Now, in the spiritual teaching, in the Gurdjieff type of teaching also, when you intentionally alter a habit, when you intentionally alter a routine, it takes an aspect of will, not to do something that harms yourself, but just to enter a tiny, tiny bit of discomfort. And holding that tiny, tiny bit of discomfort may give you an opportunity of presence. It's the discomfort is breaking a habit and is slightly bringing back a shock to the body of that discomfort. This is part of a payment for those of us that are desiring that higher consciousness. As Vinesh says, that the universal consciousness, that higher consciousness is available. However, for most of us, we're so covered in our routines, in our habitual patterns, in our habitual attitudes, that it's nearly like we have a shell around us and an expectation of, I'm going to sit the way I normally do. I'm going to eat the way I normally do. I'm going to pray the way I normally do. And as a result, that slight aspect of receptivity is covered by our routines. And it's nearly as if the broadcast of higher consciousness coming perhaps from your higher self or whatever words you use is there. But the program that we're connected to, like the dial on your radio, is not tuned to the receptivity because it's still, am I comfortable? What are these people thinking of me? What will I do tomorrow? Oh, I have to go to the bathroom. Oh, shit, I got to do this. I don't like that person, etc., etc. And you're thinking it, but your physical body has those routines and your emotions have those routines. And if there's some way to slightly alter those routines, perhaps we would be able to receive that broadcast. And that's the aspect of the Gurdjieff teachings. And what we're trying to do is enable you to acquire tools like the yoga that Vinesh is teaching, or the different kinds of exercises that one does that takes one out of one's routine. Let me repeat. There are routines that are mental, emotional, and physical. And because we're so controlled by our comfort, even the negative emotions we have are routines. That's such that the possibility of being present, being awake, or as we use the term, remembering yourself, we forget because of our casualness that's covered by this direct comfort of remaining in our routines and in our comfort. And so there's a slight payment that's not harmful. Remember this, it's not harmful. And in altering some of our routines, we have that moment of slight shock, of discomfort. Very tiny, very tiny. It's like you can change the position of your foot now and just move one leg into a slightly different place. But you're doing it with intention. And as a result, keeping your leg in that position, which is not harmful, but is slightly different from your routine, offers you the possibility of presence, of a tiny shock to your general automatic way of thinking, feeling, and even moving. And that's part of the teaching in the Gurdjieff work. And it's not different from any spiritual teaching. Because basically, spiritual teaching, here's the secret, is common sense. What works? What do you want? And what helps you to get there? And so this is one of the reasons why I've asked you, try and keep your attention in your left foot. Because that means that you're active. You're not just passionately receiving. And these tools are not for when you are in your meditation room, sitting on your cushion or your chair. It's not just simply a wish. It's an action that you're participating in. And the action is building up your muscles of focus. And enabling you, as a result of that possibility of slightly improved presence, to have more choice. How do I choose to feel? Have you ever indulged in that? Not how do I want to feel? How do I choose to feel? And in that moment of slight change of routine that comes with intention, as I've mentioned, is the possibility of remembering self, remembering yourself. And by developing that quality of choice and that quality of practice, perhaps I can enable those moments to expand in my day. So instead of being covered by my regular routine, which again, I'm saying is useful, we are able to slightly alter the routine in some tiny, tiny way that brings about the possibility of choice. It applies to attitudes. It applies to physical movement. It applies to mental thought. It's slowly but surely enabling you to have slightly more choice of how you wish to be. Mary
Yes.
Karuna.
Yeah. Is that what you call mindfulness? Is it the same as being mindful?
Yes. Except, excuse me,
What's the difference?
in in the work that we share, because every teaching is slightly different, we are teaching people to have that mindfulness more on, not only on a mental level, but also on an emotional level and also on a physical level.
Right.
So on the top of my screen, I'm looking at a gentleman by the name of Claude Harvey. And you notice he is standing. Why do you think he is standing?
So he won't fall asleep.
Exactly. All right.
Mm.
So it's teaching you to develop these simple habits that work for you, intentional habits that work for you, so that you can have more choice. However, it takes practice, because what happens is it takes a certain amount of effort to work against your automatic comfort routines.
Habits.
And so what we do is we don't only work on a mental level, we train so that your mental energy, your emotional energy, and your physical energy can be used intelligently and positively to enable you to have more presence. And in the time that I have, I'm going to give you another example and a task. In general, in Western society, we are able to articulate very easily our negative emotions. I don't like this. Or you'll see around you quite often people expressing things that they don't like. I didn't have a good time, and you'll see the face will show it, because it's just our routines. And the task that I am suggesting to you is, in the coming days, if you remember, choose to not express negative emotions externally. We're beginners. We're starting with the external expression. And you may have a thought, you may have an emotion. Just don't express it externally. And that's going to change a routine. And in the work, because we're working for consciousness, some of our routines cause us to lose energy. And expressing negative emotions externally is certainly one of them. And as a result of altering this routine, of expressing your dislikes or your criticisms or your judgments externally. As beginners, in a sense, just don't express them externally. And notice if this altering of this habitual routine changes something and allows you a little more presence. You see, expressing that negative emotion externally is a habit, just like this one. However, choosing to not express it externally allows you that moment of slight discomfort, because it's our habit. And anytime we alter a habit, it's slightly uncomfortable. And as a result, you may find a moment of presence because it takes intention. And you may find that you have more energy because you haven't, in our expression, leaked. And eventually, through the various practices that we teach, like the kind of yoga that Vinesh teaches, you develop a slightly more elegant way of being that allows you more energy to tune in and to remember what it is you really, really want. So when I was in India, and in particular, towards the end of the first year, I was in Pondicherry. Are you keeping your left foot going? I was in Pondicherry, which is in southern India. And there was a well-known guru saint. We referred to her as the mother. And she was in her 90s and wasn't available at the time I was there. I mean, she was in her room, but it was in a slight coma, an intentional coma, where she was attempting to alter something in her body or cells or something like that. And I'd been in Pondicherry, which is a small town, and the ashram is sort of in the town. And that digestive problem I had became much more extreme. And I saw some of her followers who would give me instructions on a certain kind of activity to do, which involved, during the day, spending most of my time at the samadhi of Sri Aurobindo, and sitting in that samadhi for 5 days.
Wow.
And at the end of the 5th day, I'm shortening the story for you. At the end of the 5th day, I had this experience of a kind of like a crystal with six sides descend, and it was slightly bluish, through my head all the way down to my chest, where I was experiencing this terrible discomfort. It stayed for about 10 seconds, maybe less. And slowly I was aware of it coming up through my head and disappearing. remember, I wasn't spiritually sophisticated that much. And so I stood up, I put my hand on my solar plexus and I still feel a little bit. And I walked out of the area where I was meditating, and the first thought I had was, wow, it's been nearly a month. I think I'll go to a restaurant and have a fantastic meal, which I did. And in the elation, I was writing poetry to the moon. I was, in that euphoric state that one has when the headache disappears or whatever. And I was like that for some days. And one day I met a woman that entered into a discussion with me. And for the first time in quite a while, I experienced annoyance. And I looked at her and I said, who are you? Who are you that, I was in this really high, happy state and you burst my bubble. And she told me that she was a student of the Gurdjieff work. And I said, what's that? And she said, blah, 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 blah. And so my curiosity was so high because I was shocked by this my bubble that had broken. And I went to the library. I took out a book that was written by someone involved with this teacher, Gurdjieff. And in those days, there weren't chairs easily available in the library. It was sort of a terrazzo floor. It was warm and they were playing, I'm not sure, it was not Bach, but some other familiar music, classical music. And people were just lying on the floor. There were a few chairs perhaps, and they were reading books. And so for the next few days, I went to the library and I was reading those books. And I said, son of a gun. This teaching for me tells me how to do it. The wonderful experiences that I had with the gurus that I was with enabled me to have this experience of joy, experience of bliss, experience of lovingness, getting stoned naturally. But for me, it didn't teach me how. Perhaps because I didn't stay around long enough, or perhaps because I didn't meet someone like Vinesh who would teach me the right yoga stuff. And the concept of learning how, like left foot or changing slight attitudes, attracted me hugely. And so I wrote a letter to Mr. Bennett, who had a school in England. And 4 weeks later, there I was in England. And I sat down in front of Mr. Bennett's desk. He had not accepted me. He said, come for an interview. And he asked me only one question. Ask yourself, is it right for me to be here? In other words, in England and with him in the school. Of course, I'm shortening the story. Got your left foot going? And I went inside myself and I asked myself the question, 90% of me was silent, but 10% was going, and so after a few minutes, he says, Edward, what was your experience? I lied a little bit. I said, it was silence. So he looked at me for a moment and he says, go downstairs and register. And that's how I was accepted. He told me that he accepted 100 people a year from all over the world. And 90% of them were referred by other teachers. And he held 10 on his intuition. And he said that all the places had been filled except for the intuition aspect. He didn't use those words. And so I was a latecomer, nearly at the last moment, because of, I don't know, maybe because I had 90% silence and I chose to talk about that rather than the 10% of screaming. And I worked my ass off
I bet.
for a year. Nearly every day, getting up early, doing ablutions, working in the fields, because everyone had to work physically outside in the fields, and a variety of other activities. We learned something called sacred dance, which I'll talk about for those of you that are interested at some other time. And we worked from early morning to mid-evening. And we had a break every once a week for half a day, and every 10 days we had 1 day off. And this is for about 10, 11 months. And we were changing our routines very, very often. Like an example was every meal, there was a different chief cook. And we had to figure out how to work with different people, even when we didn't know how to cook. And that meal had to be prepared. So in a sense, we were attempting to do that inner work, like left foot, change your routine. What can I do for where I am now? How do I get this food done, et cetera, et cetera. And we were in that school of learning these tools because we had to. And the impact was such in those days that I was able to make a decision that when I returned to Canada, because I had made we'll stop very shortly. I had made an inner vow that I would be available to my parents as support in their old age. And so that's why I chose to come back to Montreal. However, I had made another choice. Remember, I told you that I was touching the legs of Neem Koroli Baba?
Mhm.
Well, I discovered that I had some kind of talent with my hands that when I touched people, it enabled them to feel more quiet. And so I made a decision that I would not return to the corporate world. Before I went to India, I'd been a stockbroker and a few other things. However, I made the decision that I would work with my hands to balance out my head that has a tendency to be too mental. And eventually, I started in Montreal after a year or 2 years of doing a variety of things. I met a teacher in Boston who taught me shiatsu, which is acupuncture without needles manually. And that's what I started doing. And then I started a school. And the school did very well. The timing in the late 70s was excellent. And I found myself while I was teaching the shiatsu massage, sharing the Gurdjieff work. Sort of like Vinesh is sharing yoga and some of his ideas. And so groups started to form that were interested in the ideas. And eventually, that's what I was attracted to do. And so for the last 45 years, that's what I'm sharing with the people that are interested. And that's my service. That's my offering. And it happens through Gurdjieff, Montreal. That's on your tiny brochure. And we meet weekly, and in between, we have contact with other individuals through Zoom that helps us to, because of contact, or call it satsang. Like here you are. Remember in the beginning, I suggested to you, put on your video so that you are also aware of all of us present, attempting to keep our left foot going. And I discovered that working with other people for a similar kind of aspiration is very helpful. And that's why perhaps Vinesh and I are keeping our videos small so that we could all be present and see each other. So it's time for me to stop and ask for questions.
Edward,
Yes.
before, can we take 2 minutes to meditate on two things: breaking routines with intention to have more choice? The main concept we have been talking about, divided attention and breaking routine with intention to have more choice. So we silently in our mind, we think about those two concepts.
Yes. However, as you become silent for these 2 minutes, keep your left foot going. 2 minutes.
Let us reflect on those. Okay, so before we open to questions, I would like to give a hand to our volunteers. Some of our volunteers are here. Eric, Mary, Iona, Jocelyn, Peter. So let us give them a hand. And also, I would like just a minute about our next, no, not this. Share. Our next meeting will occur in December, and our speaker will be Dr. M. PMH Atwater. She had 3 near-death experiences, and she has done extensive research and written 18 books, and she will talk about what near-death experiences say to us about life, its living, and consciousness. And that will be on December 19, Sunday, same time. So now I will like everybody to attend that. Now I would like to open the session to questions and sharing. If anybody wants to share on breaking routine and have more choice, go ahead. Or if you want to ask any questions, please raise your hand. Okay.
Maria
Yeah,
and Mary. So
Yeah.
Maria, please ask a question. Marcia, sorry.
I
Go ahead.
have no question now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for this talk.
Other questions or sharing? Somebody would
Yeah.
like to share on it?
I've
Mary.
got a question. What comes to mind when you say routine is that they say children need routine. You know, there's a bedtime routine. Their day sort of follows a routine. They eat at the same time, they go to school, they come back. You know, they say it's good for children to have routine. So it's like we're conditioning them to follow a routine. So what's your, do you have any comments on that? Is he
Yes.
thinking about breaking the routine?
Yes. At this moment, we're not children, we're adults.
Right.
And as adults or as parents, we have responsibilities to our children. And we guide them. And we recognize that those routines help them. However, in the quality of our presence, in the quality of our consciousness, we pass on a huge amount to our children.
Right.
And altering our routines, if it enables us to have more presence, not the children's routines, our routines, it enables us to sustain that duty, that presence, that lovingness, that awareness of how best to parent. And through our quality of being, we pass on perhaps much more than we do through the physical, actual guidance. And that quality of our being, that quality of our presence, our children will carry on with for the rest of their lives.
Very
Because
good.
we are the mentors. And the responsibility of consciousness for adults who have children is immense. And so the opportunity to remember ourselves enables us, as a result of our presence, to be much more available to our children. So yes, routines are really useful until they become too automatic and put us to sleep
Right.
as
Jocelyn,
adults.
Jocelyn,
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question. I noticed that you mentioned about the sequence dance, and I had the opportunity to hear about that, but that was in recording. And since that we have an opportunity here to with a live person talking about it, you said we could ask you and for another occasion. And could you give us a quick idea and also tell us how we can know more about the sequence dance?
On the internet, you can just put on Google, Gurdjieff sacred dance. However, thousands of years ago, there was no alphabet, there was no writing. And so how was wisdom going to be passed on? And in many cases, as you can see in some societies, certainly in Africa and in Middle East and further places, that there's a form of dance. And the dance that was used was, in a sense, truth, or a kind of prayer that the individuals were taught. And in particular, the children were taught. And so, like Vanesh was taking a position like this, or an L or something like that. However, in those days, they were essence positions. It was a position that if you were relatively disconnected from your regular routine, if you took a specific position, it could produce a response in your body. And so Gurdjieff had been exposed to that, and he passed on the teachings that came through the physical movements. And yes, why don't we try one specific position? Like Vanesh so kindly showed us to take some positions. So I'll request all of you, let's take a moment, please stand. And put one hand palm down about 45 degrees. So I'm 45 degrees like this. I'll stand a distance away. And your other hand continues behind you, sort of behind you with the palm up. And it's aligned with the hand in front. That's straight ahead of you at about a 45-degree angle. And so that arm behind you is 45 degrees down, palm up. And your right foot is slightly in front of your left foot. And there's a rocking motion so that you're nearly moving onto the ball of your right foot and moving back towards your heel. Your head is looking sort of at your fingertips and beyond. And in this position, it's as if you're on a voyage. You're opening to the voyage of consciousness. You're opening to the voyage of your aspiration. And the essence of it is seeking, and connect to that quality of seeking, of connecting to your aspiration of what it is you really, really want. And there's a possibility that this is the ongoing and the start of your voyage. And that was just to give you a taste. Please sit. So when our bodies are more balanced, when we're not totally caught by the routine, it's nearly like Vinesh teaches the essence of a yoga position. And in this case, it's a specific that enables you to connect to a particular kind of essence experience. And in those days, the teachings, the wisdom was also passed on through physical movement. And Mr. Gurdjieff had been exposed to this in his travels in the Middle East, etc., to schools that had been in existence for perhaps thousands of years and adapted to exist even today by not being overt, which I'll talk about for those of you that are interested at some other time. And they pass down part of their prayer, part of their wisdom through movements instead of alphabet. And so this became part of our studies when I was in England.
Okay, any more questions? Mira?
Yeah. As you say that negativity don't express externally.
Negative,
Does that mean not talking to others, or just I don't show externally negativity?
You don't show the negativity externally. If you have, you can share a discernment that someone is doing something inappropriately as a discernment. But when it's shared as a negative emotion, it's done with identification. And it's an old habit. And when it's done with identification, there's no presence. It's just an automatic expression of something that displeases you.
Okay. Because if somebody told me something negative, suppose about me, I just stop from there. I don't talk that to second person, third person, fourth person, fifth person, because in that way, that feeling continues longer.
Yes.
So that's why if I stop just then and there, it will heal up faster in comparison to if I'm talking to 15%, means that feeling is continuing up to 15% as long as I talked. So that's why,
An example would be when for whatever reason, my wife, partner gets angry or upset and she lets me have it. If part of me is slightly present, I listen. And I'm able to hear what she's angry about without identifying, oh, I'm terrible, or I don't find myself responding back and like a two-way argument. I'm talking about good days. And as a result, we don't carry that negativity between the two of us for long. Most of you have experienced that perhaps in your long-term relationships, that if you have something that upsets you, it happens and you don't hang on to it as long as you used to. And that's part of the training, so that we can be present, but not, quote, leak as much.
Okay.
Anybody
Okay,
will like to share their experience or personal experience? Raise your hand, please.
Do you mean in this class? Sure.
No, at the moment, we are talking about the audience.
Jyoti.
Okay, any more questions?
Yeah,
We'll
there
take-
are many.
We'll take another 3 questions. Okay, raise your hand, please.
Jyoti Buglis.
I feel just I concentrate on my feet, and it's different, you know. It's colder, so it's. I wonder if the other also experiences, or maybe the floor is colder. I don't know.
Certainly at this time of year, yes.
Yeah. I wonder, you know. Concentration, actually, it's more heat, no? If you concentrate on a part of the body,
That's possible.
Generates heat normally.
Well, at my age, I get cold hands and feet. And
Yeah.
so the best I can do is not express it negatively. And at this stage, I'm aware of it in my thought, and I choose not to follow it. But it doesn't mean I'm not aware of it and that I may choose to do something about it.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, another question.
All right. If there's not a question, I have one that I would request you to reflect on.
Good.
If you have an aspiration of consciousness or an aspiration of that's strong, your number one aspiration, if one could say words like that. Perhaps that's why you're here, or that's why you're studying with Vinesh and following these things. If you could remember that number one aspiration more, would that affect the choices you make? If you could remember what it is that you really, really, really want more, would that be helpful for you?
I think definitely.
You'd be more focused.
Yeah, sure.
And so at that stage of remembering what you really, really want, life becomes a little more simple. Will this action, this choice, help me to become closer to my aspiration or not?
It should.
And so the training in self-remembering eventually connects you to what your aspiration is, what it is that you really, really want, how you really, really wish to be. And at that stage, life becomes more simple. Does this support how I wish to be or not? And if it involves consciousness, you begin to see how much of common sense it becomes. And so the concept of self-remembering, of remembering how you wish to be or what your aspiration is, and those things that support it, that help you to come closer, become a yes or more of a yes in your life. And that's the advantage of these tools. Whether it's something that I'm sharing or Vinesh is sharing. If you can remember yourself more, and that's the simplicity ultimately of the teaching. And if it affects, I'm aware of it mentally, I'm aware of it emotionally, and I'm aware of it physically. And these tools that I was exposed to help me. And I can verify, just like my left foot, I can verify at this moment that my part of my attention is there. And why? Because ultimately, it helps me to remember myself and helps me to make the choices that support me in terms of what my aspirations. And it's practical on that basis. So thank you for giving me the opportunity. You notice that I really dislike doing this.
Okay, the meeting is coming to an end.
Carrie was asking a question. You didn't. You
Carrie?
said 3 questions, and the 3rd question is not done.
Okay, Carrie, who is Carrie? What is your question? I don't.
Yeah,
see
he is
anything.
coming. Yeah.
Okay, Carrie, go ahead.
Sorry, which Korea? Do you mean me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I was wondering if Mr. Edward or you have any more time. Would you talk about your experiences with Swami Muktanada? Or maybe another time.
I think our time has come to an end,
Yeah,
but I would be glad at
time.
another opportunity if it happens.
So we would like to thank Edward for wonderful practical talk. I will also like to thank all the participants who have joined us. And as I said, our next meeting will be on December 19th about near-death experiences. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you again.
Thank you, Vinesh.
Woo!
You guys. Bye. Bye. Thank you, Vinesh.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Mr. Edward. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you.
And now you're all owl, you can all fly.
Thank you very much.
Fly high.
Thank you.
If somebody wants to stay, you can stay.
Sorry, can I?
Hi, Margia.
Sorry, I have just a question.
Yeah.
As I found this webinar for hazard, I think, how can I have the link for the next time?
Well, I will send you because you are on my mailing list. So I will send you the email.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice time.
Bye.